All right, everyone, welcome to the Yurugu study of chapter 7, pages 388 to 400, the end of chapter 7. Let's get started with our little summaries of what we learned this portion. Um, I learned a lot. I really enjoyed this last bit because she really goes into how the intracultural behavior, meaning how they interact with each other, how like yeah they'll be violent towards each other, but there's a limit to how they will use that violence. There's a limit to the destruction they'll commit against their selves. But when committing violence and destruction towards the other, towards the non-whites, especially the black people, there's no limit to the destruction. There's no limit to what they will do to people they don't classify as Europeans or white people. That's really phenomenal to read and to like really understand, and how their just how their cultural has eroded into such a system where white people are unable to develop love or true community with one another, and of course with people who are not white at all. And that's because of all the barriers that has been put up from like Plato and onward. And that's my little summary. I'll pass it to Miss King.
Okay, I have a very concise summary since it's only a couple of pages. Um, from what I understood, like what the pages, it kind of really got into and explained like the lack of European spirituality, um, and what makes them like valuable beings. Which in the reference was like obviously like this capitalistic money mindset makes them valuable, and it goes into like materialistic. And I felt that that was very ironic because we have this era now where it's called minimalism, and it's kind of a like a joke, if you will. Like you have all these Europeans running around being materialistic all the time, knowing that's in their character, like their being, and they know they can't really change that because they're money hungry all the time and capitalistic mindset. So it's very interesting that I saw this correlation and how they kind of just like polar opposites. And it's now it makes it obvious that minimalism is just for the sake of being like trendy than it is being realistic. So, and also it went into like later on in the pages the lack of like love and how they can't show love or even experience it because of their being as being like something like because they're too fixated on control that they can't like love anything because they like go straight to being in control all the time. Whether it's like from European to European or European to non-white, it's like their mindset's always on control. So love doesn't exist. And then I'm gonna pass it to Sarah.
Yes. Okay. Similar, don't have much to say. I read all of chapter 7 like 3 weeks ago because I thought that's what Ezekiel was proposing. So that's it's kind of in the back of my head. But what I will say is I thought this was really interesting just in the roles of materialism and like the effect that that has on the soul and like culturally throughout generations. And I think it just put into context a lot of times when I feel like I've interacted with people who maybe have a lot of physical wealth, but they have like no spiritual or emotional wealth. And to me, it's like when I see these people, it just seems like they're like still very impoverished, but in the ways that I find truly matter. So yeah, that was like just yeah, that was really interesting and like interesting to hear. I just read a lot about like capitalism stuff with economic theory, so to hear Dr. Ani talk about like the role of capitalism with this was really interesting. But yeah, so you can start us off.
Yeah. So I want to talk about we just mentioned how European has no spirituality and no ability to love, and I want to talk about that a bit to get us started. I want to read from 390, and she says the symptomatic and severe loneliness characteristic of Europeans is an effect of the lack of communal function of their culture. Europeans are bound to each other by virtue of a shared utama rojo of power, domination, world supremacy, and expansion. The intercultural dynamics of aggressiveness, competition, and mutual distrust are all separating, not binding. The outer directed drives bind them to a tremendously efficient machine of aggression. The culture is supremely successful in this regard. European culture is not based on a vision of the essentially human. It does not serve human needs because it is not designed to do so. So what this says to me is that there's no such thing on this planet as a human, as a person who behaves in a humane way, because the European has created an environment, a system, a global system where all people are functioning in a subhuman capacity due to how we're subjugated and due to how we're controlled. Does that make sense to what I just said? How the European has erased humanity from society?
Yes.
Yeah, and it began with
What page are you exactly?
oh, this is from 390.
Okay.
And I think this began with their abstraction, them separating everything from everything, because they discovered this is the best way to control things by separating it. And they first started with separating their senses and separating their mind, and for lack of better words. Another thing that I just wrote wow over this part. So also want to read this really quickly. And she says, one overriding quality determines what is good and bad within the analyzed world, purity, and within the entire spectrum of reality. One aspect of this knowledge fulfills this quality, abstraction. An abstract idea is a purified idea, freed from annoyingly concrete and sensuous particulars. Words themselves are abstractions. The non-sensuous senses, sight and hearing, are the mediators of abstract activity. Smell, taste, and touch are concrete, syncretic, and capable of making the fine distinctions necessary to sort out what is abstract from what is sensuous. Abstraction means distance from immediate experience, the substitution of a relatively remote symbol for given sensuous reality. Sight and hearing are thus those senses that are which best fulfill the possibility of a remote relationship to the world. Western civilization began its expansion with the discovery of perspective and the perfection of remote, visually organized, abstract activities, whether in the navigation or in the development of firearms that could kill from a distance. So I really like that because um, I've never really understood how sight, hearing are. I actually, to be totally honest, I hardly ever think about the human senses and how they can be utilized to do certain things, or how they could be how other senses can be shut out so your other senses can be used more. For example, the European doesn't really need to feel emotions. They don't need to feel emotions. So I believe that for the large majority of them, they have shut out the ability to feel, I don't know, empathy, sympathy when producing destruction and violence, perhaps. But yeah.
I feel like to be violent to the extent that like systemically Europeans have been, like to enact and go through with colonialism and like all that stuff, like you have to remove like a basic part of the empathetic self. Like I just, or like yeah, everything. seems
Yeah, and
impossible.
just to add to what Sarah's saying, I definitely agree. But I kind of think now that it has been like, it's not like in their DNA, you know, if you will, like not necessarily like in their, like how their upbringings are, you know, how people like are passed down certain traits and characteristics from their ancestors. That is just something that is lacking in that area. And it's just like, you can tell how European interactions are with non-white people on the planet in general, like everyday life, in all of their areas, in all of their like systems too. That is just, it's kind of like, I want to say inhumane, you know, like it's very inhumane. Even thinking about like workers, like labor workers, or just now we have our big corporations like Amazon and so on. Like there's so much mistreatment in those corporations that it doesn't make sense. But as soon as money's involved in capitalism and all of these things are just like their goal, nothing else matters.
Yep. And I think this can all be understood when understanding the European as Yurugu, and understanding that their like conception of love is not there. They don't have a true idea of love outside of control. You know, I think the closest thing a white person can experience love as is like their connection with their pet. Yeah, I think yeah, and I, because I've only seen like white people truly like
You
experience
don't
like,
think like people who are classified as white like feel love with their family or romantic love?
oh, see, romantic love is, see, keyword, like the key words here, romantic love. Yeah, I think romantic love is very superficial, so they can act in romantic love, but as for experiencing that as something totally like spiritually fulfilling, I have no clue. I know a racist suspect cried over a sick dog, but you know doesn't care when black people are, you know, killed in the streets, or when brown children are, you know, consistently raped in cages throughout the globe. So yeah, I was stunned by what I just said. I do not think that you can experience love outside of owning something. They can love what they own, or they can have a high appreciation and regard for it. But for true love, and
It's almost like a, oh, sorry.
yeah, go for it.
Yeah, it's almost like a childlike love. You know how like kids, they come and they're like, I love this toy. And then when the toy no longer exists or it breaks, they easily move on to the next one. You know, it's kind of just like this non-understanding or not understanding love. It's just like, hey, it's very childlike.
Ooh, Ray, I think it's really important that you said that, childlike, because we have to understand that the white supremacists, they have made every non-white person function as a childlike creature. Therefore, I have to understand this as a projection. You know, everything that is projected on us is the truth from them. So it's actually the white people who truly are the children of the world, truly are the children in society due to how they behave. They behave like spoiled brats who want it all, and when they can't have what they want, they go out and create chaos and kill for it, steal for it, manipulate for it. So that's a really good point, and I really appreciate you saying that, because that's true. The way white supremacist mindset is a psychotic child that cannot be told no, cannot be reasoned with unless force, I believe. Um, I want to hammer in this love thing in a bit more. So from 394, she says, while the conception of love as the desire and ability to merge or unite with other may be accurate, expansion of the self is not the same as unification of self and other. And this is crucial this is crucial to understanding the problems that beset not humankind, but the European specifically. If the ability to love is predicated on the capacity of identifying self with other, then it is clear from this discussion that European culture does not provide a basis for the love experience. Instead, it imposes as an entamawazo that inhibits, devalues identification and emotional participation, and an ethic that complements and is consistent with this cognitive structure. We we have come full circle to Plato. For him, knowing was more important than loving, and to know meant knowing as object, something separate and distinct from self. Europeans perhaps do not love themselves and have no basis from which to love others. And I think this can be shown in the self-negating behaviors that they participate in and the self-negating behaviors they spread onto us, train us to participate in.
Yeah, that was a really good paragraph. I think it helped me reframe like viewing love as your ability of like deep empathy, and like, right, it makes sense.
Yeah, because
thank you for sharing.
Yeah, I think to be able to love is to be able to be to to be in community, or to see yourself as one with the people around you. You know, we're all one. Nothing, no harm should come to any human beings on the planet, as far as I'm concerned, white or black. No one should be being mistreated at all, not even the slightest mistreatment. And like I think white supremacy has done such a great job of making it such a fantasy to think in such a way that, hey, there doesn't need to be mistreatment on this planet. There does not need to be people dying, suffering, because there's plenty of resources for us all to be living on this planet peacefully. But white supremacy has created the idea of a so-called utopia where everything is perfect, something we can never attain. But a system of justice can be attained on this planet. It's just that the people who have the power to do it, the white supremacists, don't have the will to create that system. And the people who have the will, like myself, don't have the power to create a system of justice. So I think it's really good to understand that we can have a something close to a utopia where no one's being mistreated. And it's really important to erase all thought patterns that say it's impossible to live out this system, because logic says that it's very possible to erase and replace this evil, vile system. Any more comments, concerns?
Yeah, I actually have wanted to comment on what you just said about replacing this system. But part of me is like, it's gonna definitely take us to replace this system, because someone without, like, I want to just call it empathy or love or whatever you want to say about this thing, can't create a system for justice that involves all people, that involves non-white people, because they have this mentality of domination and control and materialism and this relationship with money, that there's no way to create a system that doesn't benefit them in those areas of life without justice. Because in a system of justice, it's just like we're all gaining, and that means someone is not like higher status, if you will.
Yeah, like the European, the white people who classify themselves as white, they need an other to direct negative, evil energy towards. They need an entity to destroy, or perhaps they will destroy themselves, which I think is very, very, very tragic for everyone on planet Earth, because it's something we have to deal with. Unless we can change their silly, which Ani has said is not possible, but there can be a critical mass of people pursuing justice, which can be an answer to this problem. And I think it's really important to understand like this control obsession that the Europeans have, white people have, their obsession with being in control. And for an experiment, I'll go around white people and like ask constructive questions, and see what the response is. From my experience and for what I've seen, if a white person loses control of a conversation, that's where you can see the Yurugu pop out, their aggression, their anger for not being in control of the even the conversation. Because and just to hammer this in from 395, she says a lack of control is repugnant to the European sense of self, conceived only as properly distinct from other. But this is not a universal conception of love. It is romanticized, unrealistic, and it issues out the inadequacy of the European self. The African concept of love, while more pervasive, it includes mutually respectful and reciprocal relationships of many kinds and is supported by structures within the culture and is at the same time not excessive. We do not risk the loss of self and love relationships because love is the natural state of being offered before birth, guaranteed by the kin based natures of the culture, and therefore taken for granted. It is not anxiety producing, it is natural. So I think this can allow us to understand why white people kill for so-called love. They can they kill their husbands, they kill their wives over, you know, what do they call it? Like crimes of passion, they call it, you know. And I'm like, okay, it makes a lot of sense if you understand the Yurugu, if you understand that, okay, they did this crime of passion because the control of that arrangement or relationship was probably fading, so that's where the aggression and violence erupted. So yeah, crimes of passion is a great example to study the Yurugu and how we've been trained to all follow suit. Non-white people are definitely in the arena of destroying each other over so-called love. Mm. You have any else to share, everyone?
I'm just rereading those two paragraphs. Like, I think, yeah, I haven't. It makes me think about a lot of times when I've seen like the way parents behave with their children. It is a lot about like control, and yeah, being able to view this context. This makes me sad.
Yeah,
There's just like children are so vulnerable. And how much like things can be manipulated to be done in like the quote unquote name of love, but it's not like true. So
yeah, I think these are the problems to be these are the problems when dealing with a a ego, which I view as being infinite. There's no bigger ego than a European ego. How else can I describe an ego that wants to conquer and control the entire planet? That's a huge freaking ego, and very tragic. How this ego totally retards white people and their ability to grow and to develop human emotions like love, caringness, and just want to exist in truth, just want to exist in truth, not hide behind words or image or anything like that. Just to want to exist in truth. I have seen few white people wanting to do that. Um, I think this can be a good example and a great tragic example of how this ego has retarded the European collective. Can be found on 396. And she says, ironically, obsession with ego results in the loss of self through a loss of meaningful contact with others. Fanatical self autonomy becomes painful alienation. In 1988, the chronic loneliness and alienation reached new heights as people in America began to spend money to talk to strangers on the telephone. Forced into the isolation of their homes, they communicate with others who from their own cells of self-imposed privacy cry out for human contact. Phone numbers are now advertised on television that intensely isolated individuals can call in order to meet people, hear other human voices, in an effort to affirm their own human existence. Make confessions, attempt to communicate in a world that has obviously robbed them of their natural sources of human interaction and warmth that we, a majority of cultures, take for granted. And this view, anonymous sexual encounters in the parks of American cities become cultural, not individual pathology. Somehow, the symbolism of these machines, television and telephone, which mechanize communication as a substitute for organic human interpersonal relationship, is the penultimate statement of failure and success of Europe. So it's just that pattern that the European does and uses to dominate. They remove their humanness and replace it with technology. You know, back before we could just have a before white supremacy was here, I'm sure people were just like talking normally to each other, you know. But now, you know, we there's so much
Vibing.
now so many barriers from where we're talking. So I just thought what I just read spoke for itself. It's really tragic, but a great example of what they've done to themselves. And
Yeah, that makes me think of like people who become so unwell and they do like mass shooting, and how that is like such a specific, it's such a Western, and you know, we say it specifically with men who a lot of times like feel deprived of interaction with women or like any comfort, and it's just like, yeah, this is like what that's describing, like and like they're so involved with self-hatred. But I think this also points out how like self-hatred is also like being egotistical. Like all you're doing is thinking about yourself, and instead of you just like don't even think about hating yourself so much, you can just like, you know, talk to other people and like build relationships. So I think that is, yeah, I think that's like something I've been thinking of over the years, like a lot of the, and just because a lot of these things become so easily commercialized, like in terms like the obsession with like beauty, and like body positivity and stuff versus body neutrality. Like what if you just like didn't associate your whole life to like a physical thing, you know, like you could just think about other things. And even the obsession, like say you're not conventionally attractive, but I just like don't, the obsession with being like, no, I am beautiful is just like not now because I'm like, oh, it's not constructive for white supremacy, but I just think it's like still like really egotistical.
yeah,
You know,
yeah,
and like instead of just like talking to other people, and like you will feel fulfillment just from like your relationships.
yeah, just from human.
When you said that, it reminds me of this whole like daily affirmations, you know, and it kind of became like trendy, if you will, like trendy in the mind of like society trendy. But I know this has been going on for like before time, you know, but the way it has been just promoted, and it's like, oh, let's have a whole Instagram page about daily affirmations,
Or buy my book
like,
about daily affirmations.
yes, like body positivity. And you know, it's just like, let's stop focusing on that, you know, because the only reason why we're focusing on that is because you're trying to compare yourself to like this European standard that doesn't even exist. And you think this European is just like the most beautiful thing inside and out. Their mind is always positive, but in reality, some days are up, some days are down, you know. Just like learn how to work through those days, and then you can, you know, maneuver yourself and stop comparing yourself to like this thing that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Another thing too is like, who's to say that like just because you have a bad day, that means your day is like completely trash, you know, like it's not a positive day, or like, you know, who's to say that? Like, who's to say that just because I dropped my water bottle today, that my whole day is just like completely gone and it's not positive anymore? Or I'm not feeling in the
like
mood.
The life of your human existence, right?
Yes. It's just like normal life. And then we're like so down in the dump about normal life that we can't even exist.
Yeah. And like so much pressure on like assigning like goodness to things, versus like if you're just like living a healthy way, like that is within itself, no matter what else is happening. Like
yes.
Right?
And then there's also this promotion of like I'm gonna call it philanthropy work, but you know, like this whole idea of giving, like it's just like so idolized of like, oh, gave $10 to the person next door, gave $10 to the homeless, and it's like it needs to be like what is it, like not promoted, but like shown to the whole world, because that's something that they feel that is like prized, but it's a natural thing. Like you should be able to give to the person next door or whatever, you know what I mean? But it's like as soon as like even a celebrity or entertainer or someone gives like $10,000 of European money to someone who the money belongs to anyways, and it's just like they're like prized about it or happy.
Or when people
It's
film
celebrated.
themselves giving food to like people that don't have homes.
Yes.
So fucked up.
Yes.
I feel like
It's like a
yeah. It's like that is extracting any sort of, I feel like, spiritual or human connection from an interaction like that. Like, and I feel like feeding people is inherently spiritual and like nourishing, obviously, if it's like, you know, a certain type of food and not like violence, whatever, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But like filming yourself and like hoping to gain like social capital is just like, oh my God.
I think that's the result of living in a European dominated society. We have people are, due to the origins of the system, people don't have a basis of who am I, what am I about. So people have to attach themselves to labels, or like I'm an activist, or like I'm a whatever I want to call myself, you know, to get my to ascend to be this personality type that I want to present to the world, you know. And I think we live in a world where people are trying to be images, they're trying to be ideas, and they don't really have the awareness or capacity to be their true selves, or to even have the capacity to get insight of who their true selves is. Because like from 397 she says the republic eliminates spirit, emotion, and identification with other, and therefore it eliminates human meaning. European Euro-American culture at the end of the chronological spectrum ends up deficient in moral sensibility, i.e., without a guide for human conduct. So, according to the code and according to what I just read here, there's no such thing as a human being on planet Earth right now. We all have to function as subhuman beings because it's just the reality of the situation. We're so menticide and subjugated and controlled by Europeans that it's very hard to be to be a human, you know, to be a person trying to produce a humane society. We're gonna delve into why.
I think it
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think it also as well like comes from like not people not knowing their not a lot of people not knowing their identity. You know, they don't know how to think for themselves because they don't even know what those thoughts would look like or would be. You know, it's like society and Europeans have told you to think this way and act this way, and as soon as something is out of the ordinary, like whether it's back to like who you originally are, it's like they call it you like a rebellion or rebellious kid, or like just because you decide that you like to skateboard or you like to do this, and it's just like, well, I like these things. It's like, no, you can't because you have X, Y, and Z.
Mm.
Like if you're an A student, you can't go and have one drink, or like if you're an A student, you can't go and like, you know, do something else. It's
Mm.
like you have to do A student stuff.
Mm.
Or like if you're a rebellious kid, you can't have good grades.
It's very
Whatever it
restrictive.
is. Yes.
Yeah,
It's a very restrictive identity too. It's like you can't do nothing but have a mental
like
health issue and go see a therapist.
very split and compartmentalized, which is like what the European has done to their mind and has trained us to do. I think when you don't have a self-respect or self-love for yourself, then it's very easy to become a monster. It's very easy to live a life of confusion. And that is the issue with the European. They have no love for themselves. They have no self-respect for themselves, I believe. And therefore, that can explain their self-negating behavior and the current society we live in. And this is I believe it's from a white person. This quote I'm about to read, but I'm just gonna read it to get more insight because it's always nice to hear it from the serpent's mouth. So from 398, for Hall, this syndrome has a direct bearing on the ability to love. The paradoxical part of the identification syndrome is that until it has been resolved, there can be no friendship and no love, only hate. Until we can allow others to be themselves and ourselves to be free, it is impossible to truly love another human being. Neurotic, independent love is perhaps possible, but not genuine love, which can be generated only in the self. God dang it. Though it's true, you have a group of people who, for whatever reason, um, were a long time ago kicked out of Africa or had to leave Africa, and they spent a lot of time in a harsh environment, and maybe they never really learned to love themselves, or maybe they experienced a lot of like hardship there, which only produced hate and aggression. I have no clue how it happened, but I know it has happened, and I know the repercussions are very, very dire for planet Earth and all creatures who are inhabiting it. Yeah.
I have to head out now at the hour, but thank you both for the good discussion. I know it's just the three of us, but I really enjoyed it. I'll see you next week.
Ray, is there anything else you'd like to share that you maybe take notes on, highlight it?
One of the things, yeah, of course. One of the things I'm looking at now is page 399. Since you just read like off the loves part, I'm thinking of like we should start talking about the intracultural and the intercultural,
Mm-hmm.
and just really understanding like that difference, because I think I kind of get confused when it comes to intra. I know intra is more like within, like the culture within, and then inter is like group, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm. Yeah. Um. Yeah. I don't know. Can you rephrase that question?
So I think I'm just, for this question, just understanding the difference between intracultural versus intercultural.
Mm. Mm. I don't know if I could answer that question right off the bat, but I do know that maybe it could be in regards to how they treat each other, in regards to how they yeah, I think it just all depends. I think, yeah, I have no clue how to answer that question, tbh. But
Okay, so on, actually, when I flip the page on page 400, I have a note here, it's highlighted, and it's a sentence that says, other Europeans are not totally objectified, if only because of the limits placed on their destruction. It is European cultural nationalism that provides the distinction between the European's behavior towards other and his behavior towards other Europeans. So I think when it comes to intercultural, it talks about like what you mentioned, like this behavior of others, like towards others, and then intra could be this behavior within themselves. Because it says here like it's the behaviors towards others and Europeans, so meaning like non-whites and Europeans, versus like this behavior towards just Europeans and within their own cultural groups.
mm. Yeah, it could be referring to what we talked about earlier, to how like the limits they place on themselves when dealing with each other versus the limits they place on themselves when dealing with people who are not European, white people. It could be delving into that. And I think this part is really important from 399. She says, on the other hand, however, negatively and aggressively Europeans may behave towards those within their culture. They are considered to be cultural brothers, and this has very significant consequences for behavior towards them. Each person within the culture is given space to do what she can do to protect herself and to stay out the way of the other. That is really what individual freedom means in the European context. Other Europeans are not fodder to be used. Their land cannot be stolen. They cannot be enslaved. They need not be missionized. If you are a participant in a European culture, they have the same rights that you have. They have the right to be your enemy, that is, to treat you with suspicion and aggression. They have selves. Those outside the culture do not have that right. They are not selves in the European sense. So I think that could be an example of interculture versus intraculture versus interculture, perhaps. But I think it's really important just to point out that this is all true. You know, you're never gonna see a European missionary in what's a white place in Yugoslavia. I don't know if that's a white place, but or and somewhere in Russia. You're not gonna see some Christian missionary out there trying to convert people because it's not necessary. You know, because if you are a white person, you have that white asili, you have that white Utama Rojo and Utama Wazo. So you guys are already cultural brothers. And I think this mentality of individual freedom where they can like they could protect themselves and defend each other, but only to the extent where it's not damaging the entire group. I think this comes from probably cave mentality and having to survive off like minimum resources, perhaps, or just living in the ice terrain they had to back in the day. And my last thing I had to read and share some insight on was on page 400. She says European culture is an arena in which separate selves agree to compete without destroying the system and agree to cooperate in the destruction and the consumption of other systems, e.g., cultures. So that's what we're dealing with. You know, just the European white supremacy system, culture, society we currently live in. Yes, there will be white sacrifices sometime, but at the end of the day, you know, the targets are you and I, people who are not white, people, especially Black people. Um, for you want to get the closing comments, Ray? Or if you have anything else.
Yes, closing comments. Like first, I want to comment on the last thing that you said about the how it says like European culture is an arena. I feel like it's very vivid and very explicit, especially going into European systems. Like it's an arena. Like thinking of all like education system or even just like the prison systems, like it's all just set up to be an arena. Even the way like campuses nowadays, like whether it's in elementary all the way up to college level, the way they are developed or created, it's like there's always like some middle ground, and all the kids or all the people have to gather there during the fire drill, and it just very reminds me of like the Coliseum or something. Like it's just this is how we are, how it feels to be like controlled the entire time. But closing comments is European culture is so different than a non-white culture. That's it. There's nothing to really relate to. So that's my closing comment.
Yeah, my closing comment. I'm just gonna add on to that. Like this, yes, the European culture is this minority, small culture that has successfully conquered the world. It's very bizarre. It's very different, and we have to understand that this unique culture is like independent of itself. There's no other culture that is set up in a way to go out and kill everyone who is not like them and subjugate the survivors of the destruction. So this is like European culture 101. They need an other. They need people who are not white to subdue, control, make subjects. They need subjects, or else the European path will just self implode, self destruct. Um, I think there's so much that the European has bottled up over centuries of bottling up emotions and erasing their emotions. That I think she even says that these people are dealing with like centuries of like losing their humanity. So this is a very very formidable enemy that we are dealing with. Yeah, it's just, I really love the end of the chapter because it validates a lot of things that I thought. The lack of love in society is because the European has no love for anything other than no love. Period.
What? Love where? Yeah, definitely no love of anything. It's not considered love. It's just I guess you can say it's a childlike behavior that they feel that they have a strong attachment to at times. But other than that, that's it.
Well said.